August 1969. Los Angeles was about to witness one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Inside a quiet home, a woman named Rosemary LaBianca was being held down. A knife flashed in the dim light. Moments later, she would be stabbed again and again and again. One of the people attacking her was just 19 years old. Her name was Leslie Van Houten. Just a few years earlier, she had been a bright teenager from a middle-class family. But after falling under the influence of a manipulative cult leader named Charles Manson, her life spiraled into one of the most infamous murder cases in history. The crimes shocked the world. The trial captivated the nation. And decades later, the question still divides people today. After spending more than 50 years in prison, should someone involved in such brutal murders ever be free again? This is the story of Leslie Van Houten. Leslie Louise Van Houten was born on August 23, 1949, in Altadena, California. She grew up in what seemed like a perfectly normal American household. Her family was middle class. They attended church regularly. From the outside, Leslie appeared to have a stable and comfortable upbringing. But things began to change when her parents divorced. She was just 14 years old. The separation deeply affected her. Soon after, Leslie began experimenting with drugs. First marijuana, then LSD. By the time she was in her late teens, she had become part of the growing hippie counterculture spreading across California in the late 1960s. She briefly ran away with her boyfriend, and although she eventually returned home and graduated from high school, something had changed. She began searching for meaning in new communities and alternative lifestyles. And that search would lead her to a group that would change her life forever. In the summer of 1968, Leslie Van Houten was drifting through California's counterculture scene. She had spent time living in communes and experimenting with psychedelic drugs. During this time, she met several people connected to a strange and charismatic figure, a man named Charles Manson. Manson had gathered a group of followers who called themselves the Family. To outsiders, it looked like a group of free-spirited young people living outside of society. But inside the group, things were very different. Manson controlled nearly every aspect of his followers' lives. He decided when they ate, when they slept, and even who they had relationships with. Drugs were used constantly, especially LSD. Manson often gave his followers higher doses than he took himself. Under the influence of the drugs and his relentless psychological manipulation, many members began to see him as more than just a leader. Some believed he had supernatural insight. Others believed he could predict the future. Leslie Van Houten, just 19 years old, quickly fell under his influence. The group eventually moved to an isolated location known as Spawn Ranch. At the ranch, the outside world slowly faded away. Manson's voice became the only authority. He would lecture his followers for hours, repeating strange ideas about society, violence, and an upcoming race war he believed was coming. Many members of the group stopped questioning him, including Leslie Van Houten. But soon, Manson's disturbing ideology would escalate from words to violence, and the entire world would soon hear the name Manson family for the very first time. By August 1969, Charles Manson believed the violent revolution he had been predicting was about to begin. He convinced his followers that they needed to help trigger a race war he called Helter Skelter. To do that, he believed brutal murders would create chaos across Los Angeles. On the night of August 9, 1969, members of the Manson family carried out a series of horrific killings. But the violence didn't end there. The following night, Manson gathered several of his followers and drove through the streets of Los Angeles looking for another target. Eventually, they arrived at the home of a wealthy grocery store executive named Lino LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary LaBianca. Manson entered the house with one of his followers and tied the couple up. Then, he left. What happened next was carried out by the members he had brought with him. Inside the house, the violence escalated quickly. Lino LaBianca was stabbed to death. Meanwhile, Rosemary LaBianca was being held down by two attackers. One of them was Leslie Van Houten. According to court testimony, after Rosemary had already been attacked, Van Houten took a knife and joined in the assault. She later admitted stabbing Rosemary multiple times. The murders were savage. The crime scene shocked even experienced investigators. The brutality of the attacks made headlines across the country. And as police began piecing together what had happened, they realized something even more disturbing. These killings weren't random. They were part of a twisted plan orchestrated by Charles Manson and his followers. But at the time, authorities still didn't know exactly who was responsible. That revelation would come later, and when it did, it would trigger one of the most sensational murder trials in American history. In late 1969, police finally began uncovering the truth behind the killings. Investigators realized that the brutal murders were connected to a strange cult led by Charles Manson. Soon, Manson and several members of his group were arrested. Among them was Leslie Van Houten, who was charged for her role in the killings of Lino LaBianca and Rosemary LaBianca. The trial began in 1970. What followed was one of the most bizarre and disturbing courtroom scenes the public had ever seen. Manson and his followers behaved in ways that shocked the nation. At one point, Manson carved an X into his own forehead during the trial. Soon after, several of his female followers did the same. Inside the courtroom, the defendants often laughed, sang, and disrupted the proceedings. Their behavior only strengthened the image that they were completely under Manson's control. But during testimony, Leslie Van Houten stunned the court even further. She openly admitted to participating in the killing. At one point, when asked whether she felt remorse for the murder of Rosemary LaBianca, her response shocked everyone in the courtroom. She said, "Sorry is only a 5-letter word." In 1971, the jury reached its verdict. Van Houten was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to death. At just 21 years old, she became the youngest woman ever sentenced to death in California. But her story was far from over. Because soon, a major legal decision would completely change her fate. Although Leslie Van Houten had been sentenced to death, the punishment would never be carried out. In 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty, as it was applied at the time, was unconstitutional. As a result, Van Houten's sentence was automatically reduced to life in prison. But the legal drama didn't stop there. In 1976, an appeals court overturned her conviction, granting her a new trial. The second trial ended with a deadlocked jury, meaning the jurors could not agree on a verdict. Then, in 1978, a third trial finally brought closure. Van Houten was convicted once again and sentenced to 7 years to life in prison, making her eligible for parole. For the next several decades, she remained behind bars. During her time in prison, she pursued education, participated in counseling programs, and attempted to rebuild her life. But every time she came up for parole, the decision sparked controversy. Families of the victims and many members of the public believed that someone involved in such brutal crimes should never be released. Over the years, multiple parole boards recommended that she be freed. Yet the governors of California repeatedly blocked those decisions. The debate continued for decades. Then, in 2023, after spending 53 years in prison, Van Houten was finally granted parole and released. Her release reignited a difficult question, one that still divides people today. Can someone responsible for such horrific crimes truly be rehabilitated? Or are some actions so unforgivable that freedom should never be possible? More than half a century after the Manson family murders, that question still lingers. And the story of the young woman who became part of one of America's most infamous crimes continues to fascinate and disturb the world. More than half a century has passed since the brutal killings that shook Los Angeles in 1969. The crimes of the Tate LaBianca murders remain some of the most infamous in American history. And even today, the story of Leslie Van Houten continues to spark debate. For some, her release represents the possibility of rehabilitation. For others, the horrors of that night can never be forgotten. If you found this story fascinating, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more real-life stories that uncover the mysteries, crimes, and events that shaped history. Thanks for watching.